whatever your values are, they will inevitably converge with fabric.
A lot of sustainable fashion to me is taking care of the things you have and not necessarily where they come from, but making the things you do have last.
My name is Anna Hunter, and I am the co-director of the Pembina Fiber Shed. In the early 1900s, Canada was producing 98% of all the textiles it consumed, and that was predominantly wool-based textiles and linen-based textiles. So we decided to start a project where we would grow flax, fiber flax, and take it all the way, process it through to make a linen fabric. We have no infrastructure in Canada that can take fiber flax and go through the process to make it into linen. So the motivation for this project was to highlight the fact that flax grows really well in our region, and that if we wanted to be able to produce textiles in our province, we really need to invest in that infrastructure. We moved to Manitoba to start a sheep farm specifically for raising fiber and for raising wool. And then in 2018, we started a wool processing mill. For me, opening up a mill and actually manufacturing domestically, paying workers a living wage, and being conscientious of the energy and resources we consume and that we waste is, I guess, my personal contribution to Fashion Revolution.
My name is Cara Burrell, and I live south of Brandon, and I grain farm here with my husband. He was growing flax as part of his rotation with canola and wheat. It's a very versatile plant that you can use like seed, oil, and fiber from. Last year, when this project was getting put together with Pembina Fiber Shed, I just saw a post online that they were looking for people to grow. I just jumped on it. On the fiber side, because you're not growing it for seed, you're growing it for stem length. You want the plant to put all of its energy into growing as tall as possible. The actual fiber that you get ends up being about 3% of what you grew. So every plant needs to be pulled out of the ground to maintain the length of the fiber. If you were having people doing manual labor to pull the plants, I think $16 would be, I think there would be challenges with that by the time you got to an actual woven piece of cloth. So then you get into the realm of like larger scale farming. In that scenario, you have probably a substantial amount of land. You would also have like the equipment that is designed specifically for linen processing, in which case $16.50 is actually very low for farm labor. The consumer choices have like a direct impact on my life. I think that's really important because I know for myself, sometimes when I started exploring these things, I felt a little bit like you feel like one person, but yet definitely as a consumer, making decisions on where you choose to put your money and just exploring natural fibers or try making something yourself. See how long it takes.
My name is Susan Lee. I'm a retired home ec teacher who loves to weave anything from blankets, scarves to garments. Weaving is basically having warp yarns and weft yarns that are at right angles and they interlace with each other. Well, first of all, you have to choose what yarns would be appropriate. I chose for my tunic top, I chose this fine linen. I chose a lace weave. Then I had to choose how close the yarns had to be together. And I calculated how wide it had to be. And then I made this warp. And then you have this thing called a beater, which once you throw the thread across, will beat in the threads. And then the repetition of that does make a cloth.
You wove your own shirt out of linen.
Out of linen, yes. It's a very slow process. And it's something that gives me a lot of joy. The process, however, is not immediate. It's just such a wonderful thing to have something that you've created from the ground up.
I am Ash Alberg, and I'm a knitwear designer and natural dyer based in Treaty 1 territory. Natural dyes are actually what we used for all color until the mid 1800s, really into the early 1900s. At that point, synthetic dyes took over. Primarily, we're looking at different plants, but there are also some bugs that get used, as well as lichen and mushrooms too. If I'm dyeing like marigold, I would stick my marigold flowers into my dye pot with water, and I turn it on to a medium heat. It would stay like that for an hour, and then I'm gonna add my fiber. We need something in between that helps those dye chemicals to actually bond with the fiber. We're talking about a mordant, which is a metal salt. Primarily these days we use alum, which is literally the same alum that you use when you're pickling pickles and you wanna make them crispy. But then if we're doing a cellulose fiber, which is cotton, linen, hemp, then you also need a tannin. You can purchase tannins, but you can also find natural sources of it. Let's say we're using oak leaves. We're gonna stick them in the pot, extract it, then we add our fiber. And at that point, then we've chemically bonded and it's going to fix the dye. Often one of the things that worries people about natural dyeing is whether or not the color is going to stay in place. A Twinkie has a shelf life that is significantly longer than a homemade muffin that sits on your counter, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you want the Twinkie in your body. Figuring out if I can sell a skein of yarn for this much, and I need to then be able to wholesale it at this much, that gives us this much of a buffer, and the cost of the raw materials is X amount. So like making sure that there's still a profit margin in there, it's tricky. If I worked in tech, or I worked as a lawyer, or I worked in medicine, like I'd be making a very different kind of a wage. And yet I still choose to do it. And I think that that is part of the revolution. I mean, I know that when I have personally been the one to do a significant chunk of the labor, whether it's knitting myself a sweater or sewing myself a garment, I'm going to keep items in my wardrobe as long as possible. When those pieces are, past their living life, I am going to try and figure out how do I use them in a new way. It's small things, but I think that's what I love most about fashion and textiles, is that whatever your values are, they will inevitably converge with fashion. I think that's lovely.
Hi, my name is Catherine Mang, and I am the owner of Winnipeg Sews, a small sewing studio in the heart of Winnipeg. I've been sewing for about 20 years, and I've been making my own clothes or thrifting them for myself and my entire family for about the past 6 years or so. One of the lovely things about a linen shirt is that the fact that it's such an easy to work with woven fabric makes it really accessible to beginner sewists who are looking to start with something that feels really luxurious, is better for the planet. You only need a straight stitch to sew it together. You don't need any fancy machines. Your grandparents' old singer that's boot in the basement will work. All it needs to do is go straight in a straight line. One of the really exciting things that's been happening in the home sewing community is sewists have been documenting their makes, their garments on Instagram, and then breaking down the cost of that garment. So for example, for the shirt I'm wearing, I spent about $20 on the fabric. It took me about 3 hours to sew. If I was making a living wage here in Manitoba, that would be $16.15 an hour. And then if you include the fact that I needed some thread and some needles, it's about a $70 shirt, just for my materials and my time. One of the things that we're really conscious about here in the global north or the west is our prices. We don't want prices to go up. And one of the things that's really interesting about being able to pay garment workers a living wage is that the research has shown that it only increases the retail price of that garment by less than $1. I use slow fashion and sewing my own clothes as my own personal revolution against the fast fashion industry. I really think that it makes a big impact every single time somebody says, "Oh, I love your shirt. Where did you get it?" And I get to say, "I made it."
Yeah, so my name is Noelle and I am a sewist for Reclaim Mending. There's lots of different ways that things can be mended. So a pretty common one we get is denim repairs on the inside of your thighs when they start wearing down. Jeans are a great one to kind of hide the mend on, but also if it's a big tear and you wanted to get artsy with it, you can do some cool patches. Knits, sometimes you can actually re-knit the area if it's starting to unravel away. You can also darn something, which is where you reweave a section of it. That's pretty classic for socks. Linen is my favorite fabric ever to work with. Lots of the time linen can need a patch or it can tear. I have a shirt with me here. I used to be really intimidated by mending because I wanted it to look like I was never there, but now I love throwing in little patches like these because I think they're kind of fun and add some character. A lot of sustainable fashion to me is taking care of the things you have and not necessarily where they come from, but making the things you do have last. A great thing to do with linen especially, it's great for rags. One of my favorite ways to use fabric after its life is to use it as stuffing. So this is a floor poof, and it's completely filled with old fabric. I always thought growing up clothes were things that were made in like a factory, and I didn't even think people made them. I thought they were just like fully made by machines. So the idea of getting into the fashion industry just didn't even seem like a possibility. Sewing just seemed like a hobby. But now I've learned how to do sewing in a useful way, and it's pretty awesome. Sewing for me is mostly about like creativity. I love being able to use it as an outlet, but also in a way that's like seems kind of productive. But also something that I do a lot is just talk about sustainable fashion. A lot of it's not super common knowledge, so just talking about it and making people aware is a huge way to make a difference as well.